Thank you for staying with us. Our focus now is on the Africa Climate Summit. The inaugural Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi is being billed as a major opportunity to push the links between clean energy and development across the continent. African heads of state, UN leadership, presidents and governments from different parts of the world are expected to attend. It is anticipated that Kenya, with a 100% clean energy target for 2030, will utilize the summit. Will utilize the summit to showcase how renewables are fundamental to Africa's green growth pathway. A recent report on Africa's just transition, the continent's renewable energy potential, says that 50 times greater than the anticipated global electricity demand for the year 2040, which is 17 years away. Now, the continent also has more than 40% of the global reserves of key minerals for batteries and hydrogen technologies. Don't say it. Don't even say it. Well, let's have conversations this morning around this with two individuals joining us. Salisu Dahiru is Director General, National Climate Change Council. He joins us along with Nimo Bassi, who is Director, Health of Mother Earth Foundation, HOMEF. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let us begin with you, Mr. Dahiru. What is it that we should expect during this particular summit?
Actually, there are two summits. There are two parallel events. There is the Africa Climate Summit, which is been organized by the government of Kenya, together with a number of partners, the African Union and the rest. And there's also the Africa Climate Week. These two events are going to take place in parallel, while the summit deals mainly with dignitaries from the public sector, heads of government and heads of ministerial bodies across the region. The Africa Climate Week, on the other hand, is a kind of a conglomerate of everybody, policymakers, civil society, practitioners, the businesses, as well as the industries. Now, these events are regional in nature because they are aimed at ensuring that we have an ideal platform to exchange ideas, particularly in terms of the challenges that we are facing and the existing solutions that are available, and look at opportunities that both those that have advanced, like the case you've just mentioned, as in the case of Kenya, with respect to their just energy transition target of 2030. And if you look at that, for countries like Nigeria that has its own energy transition plan with the target of 2060, then you begin to make comparisons and then learn lessons. And this is also going to serve as a clearinghouse prior to the major event of the year for the climate, which is the Conference of Parties, or COP, of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, that is built to take place from November 30th to December 12th in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. So in essence, this is what is to be played out in both the events, both the summit and that of the...
Good place to start the conversation, Mr. Dahiru. But let me ask you, Mr. Bassi, you are one of 500, yours is one of 500 bodies who insisted on Africanizing, if I can use that term, this particular climate summit. What, in your opinion, necessitated that?
Well, civil society and other people who are not directly involved in terms of the driving seat of implementation of climate change from government perspective on the continent are concerned that the African Climate Summit may be a missed opportunity. We're concerned that unless governments consider climate change as something that is about life or death, if it's about making some economic gains, then we're going to come out empty-handed, and then we'll go to COP28 on the same platform of looking for economic support without really carrying out the climate action that is needed. So we are concerned that the very basis of this conference, formulated by consultants and contractors who are more into market environmentalism, will cause serious gaps. We are also afraid that there may be a lot of false solutions brought onto the table. And so we're looking for a real climate summit where the voices of the people would be significantly listened to, rather than voices of those who are, again, trying to subjugate the continent, recolonize our continent, and promote policies that are not of our, that are not basically in our interests.
Mr. Dairo, this issue of zero emissions, some say it is not achievable ever. What are your thoughts, especially for African countries who don't have the kind of funds that developed countries have to be able to move from fossil fuels to cleaner fuels?
Thank you very much. I think there is a misconception here. There is nothing like zero emissions.
Well, we hear that expression all the time.
No, it tells you net zero.
Oh, net zero. I apologize.
It's a net zero concept, yes.
Okay.
What's the difference?
Okay, I mean, that's what I'm trying to explain. You see, there are two things. The concept of the net zero is simply saying that for every activity that you do that generates GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, what you are expected to do is to counter it by embarking on another activity that is carbon negative, meaning that it serves as a sink. When you do the calculations and you end up with the carbon negative aspect cancelling out the emissions that you've done on one hand, then you have a net zero. In fact, it is possible with the challenges that Africa has been experiencing, particularly in the area of, for example, the energy poverty, that is lack or access to energy because we are not even producing enough energy, and that we've already degraded our forests, we've degraded our mangroves, the areas that are serving as natural carbon dioxide sinks. If for example, if you take countries like Nigeria, Gabon, and the rest that are oil producing and are involved in fuel extraction, that part of that activity plus others are bringing out carbon emissions, and you maximize land restoration or forest restoration to the extent that the carbon emissions cancel out, then you are achieving net zero. So the idea is not to say that there will be zero emissions. No, it's not possible. Because even as a human being, we are bringing out carbon dioxide, so you are emitting. However, the plants that you have in your garden are taking up this carbon dioxide, and if you have enough plants in your garden, for instance, you have a plot, and the law says you should utilize only 40% of it. The remaining 60% is supposed to remain green. And you're able to achieve that, then it is possible for you, even as an individual, to have a net zero carbon footprint. That's just the explanation.
Okay, well, let me come back to you, Mr. Bassi. So this is where we are now. It is also said that the opportunities for Africa, even with the dire challenges, on the continent, Africa is home to about 60% of the best solar resources globally, and already solar is said to be the cheapest source of power in many parts of the continent, while 80% of new power generation capacity is renewable. But the money is still not within the reach of many. So how, in your opinion, do you think government intends to work out helping the citizens in this regard?
Okay, I think the first thing is for government to determine and decide that they're going to invest in renewable energy, because it's simply the solution and the way forward into a cleaner future. It's something that would not necessarily depend on the national grid. Right now, we have a national grid that collapses at very little provocation. And so if you have invest in renewable energy, you could have these distributed standalone in communities, remote locations, and everybody will have the sun. So this would solve the problem to a very large extent. But let me just also comment on the issue of the net zero, because it lays a very big, it makes a very fundamental, it requires a fundamental understanding so that we do know why we are concerned about monetization of environmental issues. Now, net zero, as we heard, Mrs. Dahiru explained it very well. It just means that you pollute, but at the same time, you compensate for the pollution. That's a very stark way to put it. So, but the truth is that this is being exploited by the powerful nation, by polluting industry. So a polluting industry in Europe could, for example, continue to pollute, do nothing to change their modes of production, and then they could pay for a forest in Nigeria or in Gabon or Congo, and then they would say, well, the trees in that forest in Africa is absorbing the carbon we are producing in Europe. So we keep on producing the carbon and do nothing about changing the mode of production. The problem is this: nature doesn't work by arithmetic. So you cannot say 2 units of pollution I release in Europe is cancelled by 2 units of carbon sequestration in Africa. Nature is much more complex than that. We have to get to a point where we know the real climate action is to move away from fossil fuels. And recently, just 2 weeks ago, there was a referendum in Ecuador, in Latin America, where the people voted against oil extraction in a place called Yasuni ITT. Now, that is one. That was a major more than 5 million people voted for leaving the oil in the ground, even though they know that that is worth billions of dollars and the country needs money. Costa Rica, for example, is a country that invests a lot in tourism, so they've decided not to extract fossil fuels so as not to pollute the environment and destroy tourism. In Berlin, is also in Latin America, no offshore drilling because they depend on fisheries as a major economic needs. So at the end of the day, nations have to decide if they want to work with nature and preserve lives and preserve future generations, or they want to believe in some calculation being made by those who want to procrastinate and avoid immediate climate action. The same thing with investing in renewable energy or continue to invest in dirty energy. It's a choice that has to be made, and it's political, it's social, it's economic, and it's cultural. We have to make that decision. It determines where we go once we've decided on that.
Okay. Well, Mr. Daru, do you think what Mr. Bassi just said is practical in Nigeria? Mr. Dahiru, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Do you think his suggestions are practicable in Nigeria, given the example of those countries that have done it?
It is not. And if I go back to, if I borrow from Mr. Bassi's words, climate change and what we're doing in Africa must be looked at from the point of life or death for our communities. Nigeria, at the moment, thrives and gets most of its revenues from the oil sector. And you would never I don't subscribe to this notion that you throw the baby with the bathwater. If you have a faulty system that does not align with the best approach to ecosystem management on a global level, the idea is to look for the best methods to make that system more amenable to natural green growth. Not that you discard and say no to fossil fuels. At the moment, whether we like it or not, globally, there are two major sectors that cannot do without fossil fuel. If you take the shipping sector, there is no renewable energy that is going to be big enough or solid enough to provide shipping the necessary energy it requires. The same thing with the aviation. You are dealing with aircraft carrying almost 800 people and carrying heavy load to travel for almost 16 hours in one go. Mm-hmm. Where is the solar technology that will provide the kind of energy that is required? So development will have to take place. The idea will be to make sure that it is in consonance with the best environmental practices. So, and for Nigeria, that is why Nigeria is insisting, as far as its own energy transition trajectory is concerned, natural gas must remain as a transition fuel. Nobody should expect Nigeria to leapfrog from fossil fuel to electric vehicles just overnight. We have the gas, it is readily available, we don't have to import it, and we have to use it for our own development. Thank you.
Mr. Bassi, poverty level is getting worse in Nigeria. And here we are talking about moving from fossil fuels to clean energy, which means, of course, environmentalists have been talking for years now about moving from cooking with firewood to cooking with gas. But because of happenings in our country in the last few months, it looks like more people are going back to firewood as a means of cooking. So, do you think that Nigerians are aware enough of this climate change thing to understand all that environmentalists and organizations and NGOs like yours are talking about?
Thank you. Well, Nigerians may not use the terminologies of technocrats and academics on climate change, but they do know about the changes that are happening and that things are not what they used to be. And so they know that the map of this nation is changing in terms of coastal erosion from sea level rise. Fisher folks will tell you that the ocean is getting warmer, so they're getting less fish. Desalinization, all kinds of changes. Desertification, people are losing land. And so people do know that changes are happening in a way that is not usual. But they may not call it climate change, but they do have different terminologies. Now, you mentioned the issue of people going back to firewood from using gas because of poverty. You know, one truth is that, what has happened in the last few months has shown the chokehold of the nation by the fossil fuel industry. We've depended too much on crude oil and gas for revenue, which wasn't always the case. And there are poorer nations around us who are much better off, who don't have oil or gas. How are they surviving? Their currency, some of which we used to laugh at, are now more powerful than the naira. We may have one of the lowest, poorest currencies in the world today. And so it's not all that we need. All has indeed caused a lot of tragic consequences in Nigeria. Let me mention one thing. In May this year, the Bayelsa Environment and Oil Commission issued a report showing that Bayelsa State is polluted to the level of 1.5 barrels of crude oil per person. That is the whole state. and they have some hydrocarbon pollution 1,000,000 times above safe standards. Now, life expectancy has gone down to 41. So when I don't have a life, what are you telling me is the benefit of a resource that's killing me? Gas flaring is going on by releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere before everybody's eye, continuously, not hidden. That's another pollution we don't even care to talk about. See, something that is unconstitutional, something that's against the right to life of the people, but it's going on day and night, harming the climate, harming everyone. Well, you could say, well, we could use that gas for cooking or for electricity production. That is true. That could be done. But we need to sit down. And in fact, the National Climate Change Commission should generate processes for having conversations with people at the grassroots about what is really happening and what needs to be done. There's a lot of wisdom out there, and it may not be from the ivory tower.
Very instructive there, but I'm still going to ask the same question, although differently from you, Mr. Dahiru. Not just the awareness, but the practical actions that Nigerians are taking, particularly at the community level, the various indigenous communities spread all over the nation. How aware, how significant would you say their awareness is in terms of climate change and all sorts? Because I'm not sure whether or not you can confirm that in different interior communities in the various parts of the country, the north, the south, the east, the west, north central, whether or not people are actually conscious of climate change issues and how they themselves internalize these thoughts in their daily lives. I ask this question because we're talking about these issues this way, but then it comes back to how we drill down the conversation about climate change to the locals for them to take ownership and actually champion it for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think on one of the rare occasions I have this convergence with Nimobasi when it comes to the issue of awareness. I'll tell you, awareness about or being conscious of the effects or the impact of climate change. Everybody is feeling it. Let me just give you a few examples. For those of us that are maybe in the ivory tower, we have this habit of going home during the Yuletide seasons, and we will recall, for those of us that go around this time, the streams that we used to learn how to swim. Those streams are no longer there. Mm-hmm. And for the people in the villages that even are relying on firewood for cooking, as a child, when you are sent to get firewood from the bush, if you used to go just to your backyard and get the firewood that you needed or that is required in the house, in some places you have to go to several kilometers, and in some, no matter the distance that you've gone, you never see any firewood. The forest is not even there. If it is in terms of rainfall, you can predict when the so-called August break is supposed to happen in the southern part of the country, and when you are expected to have the heaviest amount of rainfall in the north during the month of August. Today, those lines are so blurred, it never happens. You get rainfall sometimes at odd times. Abuja, for instance, I know in the last 10 years, you could also experience rainfall even in January or even February. These are effects of climate change. And therefore, the way the rainfall even comes with so much rain, heavy storms and very strong winds that end up uprooting and removing roofs. These are also some of those consequences. The farmer in particular knows that when he plants his crop at a particular month, he knows that month is meant for planting, He knows when he is supposed to do the clearing. Today, that timetable is not as specific as it used to be. So those changes are known by our people, both individually and collectively, but linking these changes to climate change, the concept of climate change, I think is the missing link.
Which also raises the issue. My apologies, Mr. Salihu Dahiru. Which also raises the issue of the involvement of states now. I mean, the moment you talked about the farmer, well, my eyes goggled. I mean, like literally, okay, so if the farmer knows this, then this whole conversation about food security is right there, you know, under attack, if I can use that term.
Right.
So it would seem then that the major stakeholders are not connected on this matter. You sit on the Council of the National Climate Change Council of Nigeria. So what's the plan to bring everybody on board and get everyone acting uniformly to address these challenges? Because as you said, there's a river in my village. It used to be dreaded. Now it's probably a football field because the water is no longer there. And you are also very correct. We could take long treks to my grandfather's farm settlement. Today, it's almost like it's a lot closer because there is development all over the place now. So the whole farm areas are now built up. What's the plan to bring everyone on the same table and have this conversation around climate change so that we do not retrogress much faster than we should?
I think it is for the same reason that the National Council on Climate Change itself is actually a creation emanating from the efforts of civil society, including those that represent, the same stream like democracy and the parliament, to bring together a centralized body at the federal level that will be very inclusive in terms of its spread. Yes, ministers are members of the council, and it is headed by the chairman of the council is Mr. President, and the vice chair is the vice president, with about 10 line ministries. But it has, by law, representatives of the umbrella body for women's societies, the umbrella body for the private sector, for people living with disabilities, the civil society, and also the private sector involved in climate change. The idea is to have this central body that is at a level slightly higher than that of a ministry, in which it will serve as a platform and also as a rallying point, and will embark on this massive awareness creation and coordination in terms of policies, programs, and projects that will really reach the grassroots. We have on the council, as mandated by that same law establishing the council, the chairman of the Nigeria Governors Forum, as well as the president of ALGON, that is the umbrella body for all local government chairmen. The spirit being having them represent that sector means that states will continue to become part and parcel of this, the policy initiatives, the implementation strategies, and also the plan. And we've seen some positive response. We've seen states establishing ministries for environment and also climate change, and some, in fact, the last week we also saw even the chairman, the aviation, I think the head of the aviation sector, also alluding to the issue of a crisis and linking it up with climate change. So I see this coalescing in such a manner. For climate change, it has to be an issue of all of us coming together to complement the various roles. Civil society will definitely be the key player and the key policeman for the environment and also for climate, and also representing the interest of the common people. And so we have this plan of having specific working groups that will focus on awareness creation and the key role of private sector and civil societies being championed along those lines.
Mr. Bassey, just before we go, because we need to start winding down now, the issues of financing are very important, especially for countries in Africa. Will such issues be discussed at this summit? And what kind of help will be available to the poor countries who will attend this summit? Mr. Bassey?
Right. I hope you're hearing me.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
My line is a bit shaky. Thank you. Yes, the issue of finance is very critical, and civil society and some communities across the world, especially in the global south, have been asking for a recognition of the climate debt that were being owed by the global north over years of exploitation, colonialism, and neoliberalism. Because we talk of climate finance, so much been promised since Copenhagen COP15, and up till now, the target set has never been met. Even the loss and damage is being threatened to be treated as charity rather than something that needs to be paid for adaptation purposes in the communities that are being impacted. So we are looking for policymakers to pick up this demand as for recognition of climate debt and payment of climate debt as something being owed, not as charity. It's something that we need because the world is a global problem and we need to tackle it together. But coming down again, finance has been always an issue that also leads to destruction of things that ought to support us, like deforestation. A state like Cross River has just lifted the ban on logging in the community forest protected forest. Now, if you go that way, you are creating more problems while you think you are raising funds. So we have to choose is life or money. What is more valuable? And the other thing with rich countries is rather than cut emissions, they are proposing all kinds of techno fixes that are not tested, they are risky, and could bring more harm to the world. Something like geoengineering, putting mirrors in the sky, sunshades in the sky, whitening the clouds, all kinds of proposals that would create more problems. We need to openly oppose them and call for actions that are working in line with nature.
I particularly like the part where you say that the climate debts. I hope there is also a climate police that's going to ensure that those bills are paid. We're completely out of time, gentlemen. We have to thank you so much for having this conversation with us this morning. Nimo Bassey is Director, Health of Mother Earth Foundation, HOMEF. Thank you so much for your time as well. Salisu Dahiru, Director General, National Climate Change Council. Thank you also for expatiating so much about this issue for us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're back in a moment to talk about, still in this periphery, but it's a little different. Just stay with us.